My name is Renata Voss. I'm 33 years old. And the Sunday after Thanksgiving, when my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me the house would go to my brother, was when I finally understood that being capable is the thing a family will use against you if you let them. She said it before the coffee was even poured. "We've decided," she started, and those two words, the way she used them, were a door already closed. "The house goes to Dominic when we're gone. You're capable, Renata. He needs the stability." My father was standing at the counter with his back to us, rinsing a mug he'd already rinsed once. He said, without turning, "You'll understand one day." I looked at my mother for a moment. Then I said, "I'm going to stop paying the mortgage." My mother's hands went still on the table. My father set the mug down on the counter without placing it, so it landed slightly crooked, and he had to straighten it. "Don't you dare hold that over us," he said. His voice was controlled, not loud. "I'm not holding anything," I said. "I'm just telling you." I finished my coffee. I said goodbye. I drove home on a gray November highway with the heat on low and the radio off, and I did not decide anything else until I got there. What none of them knew, what I had not told them because I had learned to present my life in the narrowest possible terms around my family, was that 2 months earlier I had been named a managing partner at the consulting firm where I'd spent the last 5 years building something they had never once asked about. What none of them knew was that my brother Dominic, who needed stability, had applied for a position at that firm 8 weeks prior. His application was currently sitting in a queue that routed to my desk. Let me tell you who I was before that Sunday, because the distance between who I was then and who I was when I walked out of that kitchen is the whole story. I grew up in a house in the eastern part of a mid-sized lakeside city, not a wealthy neighborhood, not a poor one, the kind of block where everyone knew which houses had dogs and which ones had the good Halloween candy, and the social order was enforced by proximity and duration rather than anything spoken. My parents, Frank and Loretta Voss, had bought the house the year before Dominic was born. I was 4. I have no memory of the house before Dominic was in it, which is probably accurate as a metaphor. Frank worked in regional insurance claims management for most of my childhood. Loretta did bookkeeping for 2 small businesses on a part-time schedule that she had kept deliberately part-time so that she could be home when Dominic needed her to be, which, as it turned out, was often. Dominic was the kind of child who required management, not maliciously, not even consciously, just constitutionally. He was loud and funny and broke things without meaning to and needed reminders and rescues and a parent available to field calls from teachers and coaches and, later, employers. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had been allowed to remain expensive for a very long time. I was the other kind. I learned early that the way to take up space in a family that was already operating near capacity was to take up as little as possible. I got good grades without being asked. I managed my own schedule. I did not break things or require calls. What I received in return was not neglect, exactly, more like the particular freedom that comes from being considered solved. My parents trusted me the way you trust an appliance that has never malfunctioned, completely and without attention. I was the first person in my family to finish a 4-year degree and the first to pursue a graduate credential after it. I studied organizational management at the State University, commuted for 3 of 4 years to save on housing, graduated into a position at a mid-sized consulting firm called Aldervane Partners that had recruited for my program. I started at $49,000 a year. I was 23, and I thought, the way you think things at 23, that the hard part was over. The mortgage conversation happened 2 years later. Frank had been restructured out of his claims management role, not fired, restructured, which meant the position had been absorbed into a regional consolidation, and his replacement was a younger person in another city who cost the company less. He was 54, and finding equivalent work at 54 in a restructured industry is not the same as finding it at 34. Loretta increased her bookkeeping hours, but the 2 businesses she worked for were small, and the ceiling was low. They had the house, which they'd refinanced once at better terms during a period of lower rates, and a mortgage payment of $1,940 a month, and a gap that was widening. I was 25 when my mother called and said, without preamble, that they were behind. She did not say by how much. She did not say what she needed. She said they were behind, and then she waited. I transferred $2,000 the next day. I told myself it was once. It was not once. By the following spring, I had set up a standing transfer of $1,940 a month, the exact mortgage figure, time to clear 4 days before the payment was due. I told no one at work. I told no friends. I adjusted my own budget to accommodate it the way you adjust to a new commute, with mild inconvenience at first, then adaptation, then invisibility. I did not tell Dominic. Dominic was 21 that year, and moving between jobs with a frequency that suggested he was looking for the right fit, or, alternately, that he had not yet understood that fit required effort on both sides. He worked, briefly, in retail management, then as a parts coordinator at an automotive supplier, then in some capacity at a landscaping company that he described as temporary. He lived at home until he was 24, then in an apartment 2 miles away that Loretta quietly supplemented, then back at home for 8 months, then in another apartment. He was not, in any of these configurations, contributing to the mortgage. I was not resentful about this, or rather, I had placed the feeling somewhere I could not locate it. What I felt, when I thought about it, was a kind of flatness. The flatness of a fact that has been true for long enough to stop registering as a fact. At Aldervane, I was not the person I was in my family. At Aldervane, I was precise and fast, and, over time, the kind of useful that gets noticed. My first direct supervisor was a man named Christopher Hale, who had the particular gift of assigning responsibility before you felt ready for it, and then watching without intervening, which is how I learned most of what I know about how organizations actually work. By the time I was 28, I was leading client engagements. By 30, I was managing a team. By 32, I was the person junior staff came to with problems that weren't in the job description, which is when you know your position has outgrown its title. The partnership conversation happened in September, 9 months before the Thanksgiving table. It was not a surprise to me, though I had not said so to anyone. Our managing partner, a woman named Diane Sorrell, who had built Aldervane from a 2-person practice over 14 years and had opinions about precision that I found congenial, told me in a meeting that lasted 40 minutes that the firm was expanding its operational consulting division and that she wanted me to lead it as a named partner. The compensation structure included a base salary, a profit share arrangement, and an equity stake that vested over 4 years. I asked for the details in writing. I reviewed them with a financial advisor at my credit union, a methodical man named Stuart Breen who had helped me restructure my own savings over the previous 2 years to account for the monthly transfers to my parents, which I had disclosed to him in full for planning purposes. Stuart looked at the partnership terms and said they were solid and that I should take them. I signed in October. I did not tell my family. I told myself this was because the timing wasn't right, which was partially true. The fuller truth was that I had learned, through years of small calibrations, that presenting good news in my family required careful management, that a promotion became a question about whether I could increase the transfer, that a raise became a reference point for what I owed, that my professional life was not a narrative my family followed with interest, but a resource they tracked for availability. I had stopped volunteering the updates. What I did not anticipate was Dominic. His application arrived at Aldervane in early October, 2 weeks after I signed the partnership agreement. It came through the firm's standard intake process, routed by our operations manager, a thorough woman named Priya Nath, who flagged it with a note that said simply, "Applicant shares your surname, flagging in case relevant." The application was for a mid-level project coordinator position in the new operational division, my division. His listed experience included the retail management role, the parts coordinator position, a 2-year stint in logistics that I hadn't known about, and a set of skills that were, on paper, plausible for the role if then. I set the application in the pending queue. I did not advance it. I did not reject it. I did nothing because doing nothing was, for the moment, the accurate response. I did not know yet what I was going to do, and I had learned that acting before you know is how you make the wrong decision efficiently. Then came Thanksgiving, and then came the Sunday after, and my mother's 2 words, "We've decided," made the decision for me in a way she did not intend. I drove home from that Sunday dinner, and I sat in my apartment for a long time without doing anything specific. My apartment was on the 14th floor of a building near the water, a place I had found 3 years earlier and furnished slowly and carefully over 18 months, each piece considered and chosen. It was the first space I had occupied that felt entirely like mine. I had not told my parents what I paid for it. I opened my laptop. I went to my bank's scheduled transfers. I selected the standing transfer of $1,940. I changed the next scheduled date to the following month, and then I paused and I looked at the screen for a while, and I changed it to cancel after current. The current transfer was already scheduled for the 12th, 4 days away. I let it go through. It was the last one. Then I opened the Aldervane intake system and I looked at Dominic's application for a long time. I did not touch it that night. I called Stuart Breen the following morning and told him I had canceled the transfers. He already knew because I had discussed the possibility with him 2 months earlier as part of a larger financial review. He confirmed that without the $1,940 monthly outflow, my savings trajectory changed significantly and that the equity vesting on the partnership agreement would, over the 4-year period, produce a position I should begin thinking about with an estate attorney. I thanked him. I called an estate attorney. Her name was Miriam Folks, and she had been recommended by Diane Sorrell with the comment that she was the most unsentimental person Diane had ever paid, which I took as a recommendation. I made an appointment for the following week. The calls from home started on the 18th, 6 days after the last transfer cleared, and none arrived on the 12th of the following month. My mother called twice on the 18th. I let both go to voicemail. Her first message said they needed to talk. Her second said that the automatic payment hadn't gone through, and could I check if there was an issue with the transfer? I noted the phrasing "if there was an issue" and recognized it as the first stage, the one where the problem is assumed to be technical. I did not call back. My father called on the 20th. His message was shorter. "Renata, call me." 3 words. He communicated in compression when he was working to stay controlled, and 3 words meant he was working very hard. I texted him the following morning. "I told you at the table that I was stopping the mortgage payment. That's what I've done. If you have questions about the house, talk to a housing counselor or a lender. I'm well." He did not respond. Dominic texted on the 23rd. His text said, "Mom says you stopped paying their mortgage. Is that true? That's messed up, Renata. They're not young." I read it and set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made dinner. The call that changed the register came from my mother on the 2nd of the following month, after the mortgage payment had been missed and the lender had sent a standard non-payment notification. I know it had arrived because her voicemail mentioned it by name. The notice. Her voice in this message was different from the 2 before it. Smaller. The particular smallness that comes not from having been made to feel small, but from having arrived somewhere unwelcome on your own. I called her back. "The notice came," she said. "I know," I said. "What are we supposed to do?" "The same thing anyone does when a mortgage payment is missed," I said. "You call the lender. You explain the situation. You ask about a payment plan or a hardship modification. There are also housing counselors through the county. They're free and they know the process." Silence on her end. A long one. "Dominic can't," she started. "I know," I said. She stopped. The thing she had started to say, "Dominic can't cover it," was, I understood, the moment she was saying it out loud for the first time. Not to me. To herself. Through me. The gap that my transfers had been filling was not, it turned out, a gap her son could step into. She had believed, in the way people believe things they have never tested, that the stability she wanted to give him was real and would hold. The transfer stopping was the test. "Talk to the lender," I said again. "And a housing counselor. I can find you the county contact if that's helpful." "Please," she said. I looked up the county housing assistance office, found the number for a counselor intake line, and texted it to her when we got off the phone. Then I made tea and reviewed a client deliverable that was due the following morning. My mother's appointment with the housing counselor was in the 3rd week of that month. I know because she mentioned it in a text, not to ask me anything, just to say it was happening, the way you tell someone something to make it real. The counselor's name, she said, was Adizo Wusu, and she had been patient and very organized. I did not call Dominic. Dominic called me once, 11 days after my text exchange with my father. He asked, in a tone that was attempting reasonableness and landing somewhere near it, whether I had actually canceled the mortgage payment or whether it was a temporary pause. I told him it was permanent. He said, and here his voice shifted slightly, tightened at the edges, "You know they were counting on that." "I know," I said. So, you just decided to stop? Yes. Because of what Mom said about the house. Because of a number of things, I said. The house conversation was the last one. A pause. What does that mean? It means I'd been paying that mortgage for 8 years, Dominic. 8 years of transfers, the full payment every month. And the conversation about the house was the first time I understood that neither of them had ever thought about what happens when I stop. The silence that followed was the particular quality of someone doing arithmetic they have not done before.
8 years, he said.
Yes. I didn't, he stopped.
I didn't know it was that long.
I know you didn't, I said. Another pause, longer. What are they going to do about the house? Talk to a lender about their options. There may be a modification available. Your mother is working with a counselor. And you're not going to... No, I said. I'm not. He was quiet for a moment more. Then, okay. That was the end of the conversation. It was not a reconciliation. It was not a confrontation. It was two people after a long time being honest about what was true. The Aldervane intake decision had been sitting in my queue for 6 weeks. I made it on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of December, in my office on the 7th floor of the building where Aldervane occupied the top 3 floors, with the lake visible from the east-facing windows when the weather was clear enough. It was not clear that morning. The sky was the flat white of a winter overcast, the lake the same color as the sky, and the line between them was barely visible. I reviewed Dominic's application one more time. His experience was thin for the coordinator role as written, but not implausible with additional onboarding time. His references, I had read them when the application arrived, were specific and credible. One of them, his supervisor at the logistics company, had written something that stopped me. Dominic works harder when he understands why the work matters. He's needed someone to show him that. I read that twice. Then I forwarded the application to Priya Nath with a note. Please move to second round review. I'll conduct the final interview directly. I did not tell Dominic. I did not tell my parents. The second round interview was conducted by 2 of my team leads, a woman named Odalise Fitch and a man named Ben Carew, who had been with the division since before my partnership. They sent me their notes the following week. Both were cautiously positive. Odalise wrote that he had prepared thoroughly and asked the right questions. Ben wrote that he seemed to be trying to understand the work, not just get the position. I scheduled the final interview for the 2nd week of January. Dominic arrived at the Aldervane offices at 9:50 a.m. on a Tuesday, 10 minutes before the interview. I know the time because Priya Nath texted me when he checked in at reception. I was in my office reviewing the morning's client reports. I did not go to reception to greet him. He was shown to a conference room on the 6th floor, offered water, and asked to wait. I came down at 10:02. He was sitting on the far side of the conference table when I opened the door, and when he looked up and saw me, his expression did something I had not seen it do before. Not surprise exactly, more like the completion of an equation he had been working through in the lobby and hadn't quite finished. I sat across from him. I put the folder with his application on the table. I want to be clear about something before we start, I said. You applied through the standard intake process. This is a standard final interview. I'm conducting it because this position reports to my division. If you're offered the role, it will be because you're the right fit and the terms will be the standard terms. If you're not, the same applies. Do you understand that? He said, yes. Good, I said. Let's start. We talked for 45 minutes. I asked him about the logistics role, the one I had known about, and he explained it with more specificity than his resume had suggested. He described a problem he'd identified in a routing process, a change he'd proposed, and the outcome, which had been positive. He described it without embellishment. He was not trying to perform. He was trying to be accurate, which I found more useful. I asked him one question that was not on my standard list. I asked him what he thought the hardest part of working for someone you knew personally would be. He thought about it for a moment, his hands flat on the table. Knowing that I didn't earn the interview the way everyone else did, he said. And having to earn everything after it twice as clearly, because of that. I wrote that down. Not because I hadn't expected it, but because I wanted him to see me write it down. I thanked him and told him the firm would be in touch within the week. I stood up. He stood up. We shook hands across the conference table, a formality we had never performed before in our lives, and I held the door and he walked out. I went back to my office and sat for a moment before I returned to the morning's reports. The lake was still the same flat white. The sky had not changed. I called Odalise and Ben and told them my assessment. I said I thought he was hireable with a structured onboarding plan and clear performance expectations at 60 and 90 days. They both agreed. I told Priya to send an offer letter the following Thursday. He accepted. I told my mother about the hire 2 days after the offer was accepted. Not before. I had not wanted the hire to feel like a favor or the refusal to feel like withholding. The decision had been made on the terms I had stated, and she needed to know that in the right order. She was quiet for a moment when I told her. Then she said, "You interviewed him yourself." "Yes," I said. "And you hired him." "Aldervane hired him. I made the final call." Another pause. "Why?" It was a real question, the same way "what do we do" had been a real question on the call about the mortgage notice. My mother, I had come to understand, asked real questions in the moments she was most frightened, which were also the moments she had the least capacity to manage the answers. I tried to give her one she could use. Because his references said, "He works harder when he understands why the work matters," I said. And I wanted to find out if that was true. She did not respond immediately. I heard the house in the background, the refrigerator, the particular creak of the back hallway that I had known since I was 4 years old. "Okay," she said finally. "The house," I said. "What's the status?" A brief pause. "Adiz found us a hardship modification. The payment is lower for 18 months while your father picks up contract work. It's not the same as before." A breath. "But it's staying." "Good," I said. "Renata." A pause. "Thank you. For the counselor number." "Of course," I said. We hung up. Dominic started at Aldervane on the first Monday of February. I was not his direct supervisor. That was Odalise, deliberately because the structure needed to be clean and because Odalise was better at onboarding than I was. What I was the managing partner of the division, which meant I was present at the weekly team check-in, visible in the hallways, copied on the 30, 60, 90-day reviews. He knew I was there. I did not treat him differently than anyone else, which was, I suspected, the thing he had described in the interview, having to earn everything twice as clearly. His 30-day review from Odalise was positive with noted areas for development. His 60-day review was stronger. By the 90-day mark, Odalise had added him to a client-facing project with a note in the review that said he had stopped waiting to be told what the problem was and had started identifying it himself. That was the thing the logistics reference had said about him. It was, I found, accurate. I did not tell my parents about his reviews. That was his information, not mine to carry. In the spring, I met with Miriam Folks, the estate attorney, for a second appointment to review the documents she had drafted. She was, as Diane Sorrell had said, unsentimental, a quality that I had come to understand was a form of respect. She did not ask me about my family. She asked about my intentions, my assets, my timeline. I told her. She drafted the documents accordingly. I reviewed them on a Saturday morning in my apartment with the windows open and the sound of the city below, the particular spring morning sound of water and movement and distance, and I thought about what it had cost me to get here, not in the abstract, but in the specific. The 8 years of transfers. The quiet professional life I had kept small in my family's presence. The way being capable had functioned for so long as a reason I didn't need anything. I signed where it said to sign. I initialed the pages that required initials. I sent the documents back to Miriam's office by courier that afternoon. There is something that happens in families built around one person's invisible labor when that person stops. It is not dramatic, usually. There is no single moment when the walls come down, no confrontation where everything gets said. What happens is quieter. The structure becomes visible precisely because it is no longer there, and everyone has to look at the shape it left. My mother began budgeting, something she had not done with any rigor, while my transfers had covered the gap. She started with a worksheet Adiz Owusu had given her and expanded it over several months into something more detailed. She mentioned it once, in passing, with a tone that was not quite pride, more like the specific satisfaction of a tool working the way it was designed to. My father found contract work in claims consulting, which was different from managing the claims department, but used the same knowledge in a different configuration. The work was project-based and intermittent and required him to be flexible about timing in a way he found difficult, but he managed it. He mentioned it to me once, on a call in April, with more detail than he usually offered. I listened. Dominic, at his 6-month review, was assigned to lead a component of a mid-sized client engagement. Odalise and Ben both signed off. I reviewed the plan and approved it. He delivered. The client noted, in their follow-up, that his process documentation had been exceptionally clear. I read that, and I thought about the reference letter. He works harder when he understands why the work matters. I had decided to find out if that was true, and it was, and that was worth something, not as a vindication of anything but as a fact. Sometimes a fact is enough. On a Thursday evening in late autumn, 14 months after the Thanksgiving table, I had dinner with my parents at the house on the lakeside end of the city where I had grown up. Not a Sunday dinner, a Thursday, which was unusual, chosen because Frank was between contracts and Loretta had made something she wanted to make and had called and asked if I could come. I could come. The house was the same. The table was the same, the good plates, the bread basket slightly off-center. Frank had started a project in the backyard, a garden bed he was building from salvaged brick, and he talked about it through most of the first course. Loretta had made a chicken thing she'd made all my life, with olives and potatoes, and it tasted the way things only taste when you've known them so long they're stored somewhere below the level of preference. Dominic wasn't there. He had his own Thursday, his own apartment now, 2 miles from the Aldervane building. I didn't ask about him, and they didn't offer. He was a separate story now, not because anything was severed but because things had been put into their actual configuration, and the actual configuration had room in it for separateness. After dinner, I helped clear the table. My father washed, and I dried, the way we had done when I was small enough that I had to hold the dish in both hands. He did not say anything about the transfers or the mortgage or the Thanksgiving table. Neither did I. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in the only language those things can be said in, which is action and consequence and time. My mother walked me out. We stood on the front step for a moment in the cold, the street quiet, the neighbor's porch light on. "Are you well?" she said. "Yes," I said. She nodded. Not with relief, more like confirmation. The way you nod when you've suspected something for a while and find out you were right. I drove home along the lake. The water was dark and flat in that season, the kind of dark that holds a city's lights along the edge without giving them back. I kept the radio low. I was not thinking about anything in particular. I was just driving home, which was mine, in the direction I had chosen, which was also mine. There is a phrase I have returned to more times than I expected since all of this. It found me, the way these things do, at an ordinary moment, a Tuesday morning, coffee not yet finished, looking out at the flat, white winter lake. The clearest thing you can give someone is an accurate picture of what you will and will not do. I had spent 8 years not giving my family that picture. Not out of deception, out of the particular form of accommodation that wears the costume of kindness. What I had been accommodating was not their need. It was my own discomfort with being seen as someone who had limits. And the limits were not the problem. The limits were the most honest thing about me. If you've ever been in a family where your competence was treated as a reason you didn't need anything, where being capable was used as evidence that you had enough, I want to ask you something specific. Was there a moment when someone in your family had to say out loud, for the first time, that they couldn't cover what you've been covering? Because that moment at the kitchen table for me on the phone with my mother, the moment she started to say Dominic can't, and then stopped, that was the first time the structure became visible to anyone but me. Leave that in the comments if it resonates. I read every one. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and hit the bell. A new story comes every week, and I don't want you to miss the next one. This has been Renata's story. Thank you for the time you gave it.